Now that you've done a bit of coding, it seemed like a good idea to go over some basics. We've already met variables, and I think of them as being a box. A box can either have something in it, or it can be empty. So we can set up an empty variable, or our variable can hold a value. We've got several kinds of variables. If we're wanting to treat something as text, then that variable is known as a string, and it would be in speech marks. If we've got a number without a decimal point, that's an integer. If we have a number with a decimal point, that's a float. We could also use true and false. These are Boolean values, and you'll notice that in this case I don't need speech marks, but I do need the capital, and if you're working in PyCharm, those will be colored deep blue. When it comes to naming variables, there's a few rules. The first character can't be a number. If you try put in a number as the first character, you'll get a syntax error. Likewise, your variables can't include spaces. If you've got a space in your variable name, you'll get a syntax error. When you're naming variables, you should use lowercase and underscores. It's okay to have numbers in there as long as they're not the first character. In addition to variables, sometimes when you program, you'll want a constant, something like pi that doesn't change. At the top of your code, you could set pi to 3.1415, and then afterwards, anytime you need to use it, you can just use that constant pi. It turns out that if you use uppercase for your variable names, your code will still work. Using uppercase for constants is a Python convention. It's what all Python programmers do routinely, and if you break that convention, it means that at senior level, your grades would be limited. Something that you should be aware of is the difference between a single equal and a double equal. When we set up variables, we use a single equal. If you've got an if statement or a while loop, and you want to compare if two things have the same value, then you'd use a double equal. If you forget to use a double equal in your if or while statement, all that will happen is you'll get an error, and hopefully when that happens, you'll realize that you need to put in a double equal. It turns out that in addition to using double equal to check if two things have the same value, we can make other comparisons. We can check if they're not equal. We can compare if one number is less than another, more than another, less than or equal to, or more than or equal to. One of the biggest things in Python is indenting. We use it for loops, if statements, try-except code, and functions. To indent code, we use a tab, and before we indent, we almost always have a colon. In fact, if you're working in PyCharm, when you put the colon in and push enter, it should automatically indent for you. Here's an example of two loops where we've got our colons and then indented code. Here's an example of an if, else if, else statement, where once again, we've got code that will execute when it's indented. Here's our try except code, and it's the same idea. Note that we only use try except code to check that users have put in an integer or a float. If we're wanting to check that users have put in a valid string, we wouldn't use try except code to do that. We have functions which are also indented, and once again you can see that pattern where we've got the colon and the indented code. Hopefully this has helped you to get a better understanding of some of the basic ideas in Python.